Okay, so let's revisit the idea of the invisible hand and efficiency of markets. So efficiency is usually used in the sense of Pareto efficiency, and I already gave you the warning that you shouldn't read too many positive connotations in that description that markets are Pareto efficient. It has a very limited circumscribed meaning, which we need to be aware of, and it's not amounting to saying that markets can solve all our problems, right? The questions of equity and distribution, which are an entirely different Pandora's box. Yeah. Typically, markets will take us to the frontier of the utility possibility set. One way to think about the first welfare theorem is that if we are debating whether to regulate or restrict markets and their operations, there's no way to avoid ethical discussions. That's one way to put it, right? Which sounds very different from just saying markets are Pareto efficient. Why do I say that? If markets take us to the Pareto frontier, to some point on the Pareto frontier, then anybody urging some sort of government intervention in the markets is essentially arguing for moving us to another point on the Pareto frontier, preferably, which means that inevitably we are making a case for making some people better off at the cost of others. In other words, we are making interpersonal comparisons. We are saying that, it is worth it to make some homeless people better off at the cost of billionaires losing 1% of their income or wealth. Yes, we are making statements of that sort. Now, that involves value judgments and moral judgments, which is not, moral judgments are not bad things. I mean, when we are negotiating how to weigh interests of various people and citizens, there's no escaping moral judgments. So what the invisible hand theorem says is that the market doesn't leave room for improvements on which it is easy for everyone to agree. If market outcomes were Pareto inefficient, we were inside the frontier, the market was placing us inside the Pareto frontier, we could find changes or policy interventions which would be win-win. Everybody would win out. Now, what it says is that the market leaves no room for such win-win improvements, which is not to say there are no improvements which many of us, using our ethics and morals, will not find very, very attractive. Hopefully, I made that clear. I'll come to the issue of distribution and equity and so on. Now, before that, today, I want to talk about important implicit assumptions which didn't quite spell out, but this narrow result that market outcomes or market allocations are efficient are relying on certain very strong assumptions that we have made, but we're a little cagey about it, perhaps. So I want to spell out those assumptions and explore a little bit, not at great length, their implications. So markets lead to Pareto efficient allocation under certain circumstances, in certain situations, under certain assumptions. They will not lead to even efficient allocations if those assumptions are violated or in situations involving alternatives. So what are the caveats to the first welfare theorem? What do we need to assume to make it true? Caveat one is there are no externalities. Okay. What is an externality? An externality is when a situation when one person's consumption or production imposes a cost on somebody else. Okay, so the classic example for negative externality is pollution. Industries which create pollution, emit a lot of smoke and put stuff in the rivers, they're hurting others, right? They're causing lung damage to the people living near the factory. If they're putting pollutants in the river, they're damaging fisheries. They're, again, affecting human health. They're sending medical bills soaring for people affected by those things. So they're imposing various kinds of costs on others. So that's a negative externality. There are also positive externalities. If factories install scrubbers, that's a positive externality because it reduces pollution. So it's moving in the other direction. People have argued that education has a positive social externality. If I get educated, I can help others, right? I can use my information and access to information to give advice to others. So, if there's a farmer who's educated and his neighbor is less educated, the educated farmer can inform the neighbor about, prices in distant markets by looking up the internet and so on and so forth. Vaccination is a positive externality. Yes. Of course, we make private cost benefit assessments to decide whether we'll be vaccinated or not. I have to pay a cost. I have some benefits. It gives me some immunity, some protection. But the externality comes from the fact that it also gives protection to others. If I'm vaccinated and less likely to catch COVID, then I'm less likely also to infect my family members, my neighbors, in particular, people in the market. And that if I were purely looking at my narrow self-interest, just my own well-being, and wasn't very socially minded, then I wouldn't count the benefit I impose on others. So if the production of some goods involves positive or negative externalities, then those goods will not be provided at an efficient level. Okay, so let's see, in the simple framework that we were dealing with, how we can bring in externalities and what that creates. So I'll amend the utility function of the consumers, the net utility VI, in this manner. It's as before, the utility from bread. So let's say, bread now produces smoke and creates externalities. The bakeries are polluting the neighboring regions. So all that I've done is thrown in this extra term in the consumer's net utility, which is minus E of X. This is an increasing and convex function. What is X? X is the sum of all the production, right? The total amount of bread that the bakeries are baking. So it's a total production. Presumably, the smoke and the pollution is proportional to the total quantity that is being produced. So this is a function which says that the more the bread production, more the pollution, and more that does that affect every individual via this function. It's an increasing function, so more pollution is bad. So now let's go back to the utilitarian social planners problem, which is the easiest to solve because so what we are going to say will go to apply to even a more general social planner. So what does the social welfare function become? I will not repeat every step. They're simple enough, and you've seen it before, right? So many of the constraints can be eliminated, and we'll not bother about the transfers, TI and SJ, the lump sum transfers, because the utilitarian planner doesn't care what they are, as we saw before. So we'll ignore all of that, ignore the constraints. So the social welfare function previously was this. This was the size of the pie, as it were, right? Sum of utilities minus sum of costs. And now you have to subtract all the externality costs suffered by the various individuals. So that's N times E of X, right? And subject to, of course, one constraint remains, the overall production constraint, that total consumption has to equal total production. Again, I'll not do the entire setting of the Lagrangian, etc., but it's very easy to see that if we do the same exercise as before, with this extra externality cost thrown into the problem, we essentially end up with this first order condition of optimal allocation, that marginal utility of each consumer has to equal marginal cost of each firm plus the social externality cost, the social damage at the margin caused by extra production. Okay, so we can say that this is the private marginal cost for any bakery to make more bread. But whenever a bakery makes more bread, socially speaking, counting everybody's interests together, the social marginal cost now involves this extra term, okay? And that has to be accounted for. So any allocation which satisfies this basic equation is socially optimal. Let me draw a picture, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but just to sort of drive home the point. So let's take a simple case where the marginal cost of bread is constant, let's say. All bakeries have some constant margin. I don't need to assume that, but just to keep things simple. So that constant private cost of production is C, right? It's the cost of all the labor, the wheat, the flour, which goes into it, and so on. So this is the total amount of bread in the market, and this is the market demand curve drawn the usual way. What will be the market supply curve? It'll be this, it'll be horizontal at S, right? When everybody has the same constant cost of production, we'll have a supply curve like this. Now, an unregulated market will produce this quantity, let's call it X hat, and the market price will be the same as the private cost of production. So when externality is present, we should think of this as the private marginal cost of production. Now, the social marginal cost has to take into account that E function, okay? So we can plot the social marginal cost, right? So I can plot C plus N prime EX. So that'll be a curve. C plus the total externality cost of any extra production. And that has a different point of intersection, and that really is the optimum point from an efficiency angle. Yes, as the maths showed us. So as you can see from the picture, because the social marginal cost is above the private marginal cost, its point of intersection with the demand curve will be to the left. So it will involve a lower quantity, and the ideal price or the shadow price of the world should be higher. So left to itself, the market will not give us efficiency. Because the private producers don't internalize this cost they're imposing on others. They're underestimating the overall cost, and so they overproduce. So this is a classic kind of summary result, right? If there are negative externalities, the market ends up overproducing. And in the same logic, you can easily see that if there's positive externalities, like for example with vaccination, then left to itself again, the market would be underproducing, or people would choose too little vaccination. Too many people will not get themselves to be vaccinated. So based on the positive externality of an infectious disease, there's a straightforward case for subsidizing vaccines. Now, before I get there, let me talk about negative externalities like pollution. So is there a policy solution? Well, it's very easy to see. The government can correct this by imposing a tax, which is called a Pigouvian tax, because many years ago, Pigou, British economist kind of suggested this, right? He said, okay, when negative externalities are there, like chemical industries, for example, which create a lot of pollution, oil industry, etc., you should impose a tax, let's say tau, let's say it's a tax on quantity. The question is, what should be the tax rate? And the tax rate, of course, has to be carefully chosen. The Pigouvian tax rate will solve the problem for us if we can carefully calibrate and peg the tax rate at some optimal level, right? Now, what is the optimal Pigouvian tax? Mathematically speaking, if the market is left to itself, it will end up equating marginal utilities and marginal costs, period. Okay, but what we want decisions to be, we want the quantities to be such that marginal utility equals private marginal cost plus social marginal cost. Okay, so that's the missing element. So the idea of a Pigouvian tax is very simple. Force the firms to internalize the cost on others that they are ignoring. Okay, by setting a tax rate which is exactly equal to the externality damage that they're creating at the margin, at the efficient quantity level, right? So this tax is to be calculated. It has to be set equal to this term on the right-hand side, which the firms are not counting in their private decisions. But what is the specific number? It's, you put in the socially optimal quantity and calculate this term, and that is your Pigouvian tax. Let me go to the picture. So in the picture, what ought to be the Pigouvian tax level? Well, this is the socially efficient quantity. This is where we want production to be. So if I picked a number out of the hat and impose some Pigouvian tax like this, okay, that means that'll raise the supply curve and it will move the market production level, it'll reduce it, but it won't be enough. It won't take us all the way to X star. It'll move us in that direction. So the exact quantity is, if you could somehow estimate the social damage function, then in terms of this picture, you want to impose a tax which pushes the supply curve up to this level. Okay, so this gap that initially existed is the tau, is the optimal Pigouvian tax. Of course, to implement it in practice, we need several kinds of estimates. Experts have to go and tell us, through their studies, what this E function looks like. Okay, but once we kind of do that work, we can, in principle, calculate an optimal Pigouvian tax to solve the problem. Now, conversely, as I was saying, in the vaccine case, we have positive externality. So this E function will actually be downward sloping. It's defined as a cost. So if you want to capture benefits of more production and consumption of vaccines, then this will be exactly a downward sloping function. So the optimal social output level will be larger than what the market tends to produce. And there the solution is the same, essentially, except for a tax like this, we have to provide a subsidy. Okay. So again, if we have good estimates of the positive externality created by vaccines, then we can calculate a subsidy level, which will take us to optimal vaccination rates through private choices. So the externality problem, of course, is not an obscure or unusual problem. It is there practically in all industrial production because of, at the very least, greenhouse gases and climate change and global warming, which is a looming problem for us, right? So that's why there's all the talk about carbon taxes and so on.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So the diagram which you have drawn, in that you have considered private marginal cost curve to be horizontal. Is there any particular reason to consider this?
No. I could have taken, I just wanted to avoid the problem of aggregation, right? If you have a bunch of firms,
okay,
there's a sense in which you can still think of the supply curve as some sort of marginal cost curve. Okay, but it's not the marginal cost curve of one individual firm. it's the marginal cost if production was allocated, any production, aggregate production was allocated efficiently across the firms. And then if you kind of calculate a combined cost function for the industry as a whole, the marginal cost of that combined cost function would be the supply curve in the market.
Yeah.
So that's a long, convoluted thing which I wanted to avoid. And
Then that is because of the assumption of perfect competition, right?
Yeah, it's related to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
But there's nothing, no special significance in taking it this way. I just wanted to avoid some tricky issues of interpreting the supply curve as a marginal cost curve. It can be done, but it requires some explanation in the general case when costs are where marginal costs are not constant.
Thank you, sir.
Now, most of you are familiar with these ideas, at least the core idea. Okay. Externalities, big issue, have to keep in mind. Caveat 2, for certain kinds of goods, the market doesn't function well at all. Once again, we run into a problem, leaving the production of those goods to markets. And these are called public goods. Okay. So what are public goods? So what's the definition of public goods? Public goods are things like, national defense, law and order, maybe roads and highways, etc. But let's get down to concrete concepts. There's private goods, right? Cars and apples and houses and so on. And then there's these public goods. What's the difference really? Well, a pure public good has two features which make them different from the usual private goods which we individually buy. One of the features is called that they are non-rival in consumption, meaning one person's consumption does not reduce another person's consumption at the same time. For example, if there's a big public park in my neighborhood, a big park, I can go and sit in the park in the sun or take a walk and enjoy the park at the same time as you. You can also come and do it. Unless the park gets very overcrowded, if there's not too many people, one extra people coming into the park does not take away from the consumption and enjoyment of the park by others. So that's what is called non-rival in consumption. Now, if there's an apple, if I eat the apple, you can't eat it. And if you eat it, I can't eat it, right? So an apple is rivalrous in consumption, but the park isn't. And so that's one of the two features that makes something qualify as a public good. What is the other feature? The other feature is that the good has to be non-excludable. Okay, what is non-excludable? Well, in the case of the park, actually, you can sort of keep people out. You can erect a gate and you can, give people sort of cards which they have to swipe to enter into the park. So a park may, depending on how it's physically built, it may have the first feature, but not the second. But think of something like, clean air, for example. So the government takes some measures, cleans up the air. Now, if the air is cleaner for you, let's say the air in Delhi, then it's cleaner for me. You cannot, if the government doesn't like me or thinks that I didn't contribute enough or something, it cannot stop me from breathing the cleaner air. National defense, the army and the navy, they're protecting the country. It cannot selectively protect some people and not others, right? If it's protecting the country from external aggression and war, then everybody enjoys that benefit for, it's not possible to exclude anybody from that benefit. It's either there for everyone or for no one. So if a good has both of these features, it's non-rival in consumption and non-excludable, then we'll call it a public good in the classical sense. It's what may be called a pure public good, okay? And if a good has none of the features, then it's a pure private good. Now, of course, there can be hybrid cases or partial cases. For example, take the example of the park. Okay, if you build it with these entry gates and fences, and if you can regulate through technology who gets to enter the park and who doesn't, then it only has the first feature, not the second. Sometimes that's called club goods, right? Non-rival, but excludable. A road or a highway depends on how it's built, right? If you have set up poll booths and entry barriers, then it becomes a club good, right? Then entry can be regulated for or conditional on paying a fee. But roads in a city which are not set up with toll booths, they are pure public goods because they have both features. Now, of course, how will a market provide us with public goods in an efficient manner? Can the market build national defense systems? Can a market, supply us with the roads and highways, police department, clean up the environment for us, etc., etc.? Okay, and the obvious answer is no. I mean, that's even if you set up a system where people are asked to voluntarily contribute. Okay, let's say some company creates a fund and say, okay, every bit of contribution will go towards expanding the national highway network or expanding the army. Now, you may get some contributions, but the contributions will fall way short of what is optimal. Okay, so the public goods will be seriously underprovided because of the free rider problem. The free rider problem essentially arises from a positive externality. If I contribute to the fund to expand my neighborhood park or clean up the neighborhood, clean up the dumpsters and so on, I have an incentive, a private incentive, to rely on the contribution of others. Or put differently, I don't take into account the positive externality that I will create for all my neighbors whenever I contribute to the fund and make it grow and expand the effort, cleanup effort, and so on. So what is the solution? Then the solution is government provision. Especially if it's a pure public good, the only option is not to let things to the market, but rely on the government. But of course, there's agency problems in the government, meaning there's corruption, waste, and so on. Anyway, it's not a perfect world. But let's get into a little more detail about this issue. Okay, so let me bring in public goods into our simple framework with a smallest modification that we need to do. So back to the consumer utilities from profits, I'll make one small amendment. What is the amendment? The amendment is very sneaky. Compared to the previous thing, I have dropped the I subscript inside the consumer's utility function. Right? So what does this X mean? It's the aggregate production. So the consumer derives utility from the total amount of this good, right? Not some individual consumption. That is what is relevant for a private good. For a private good, I don't care how many cars are made by the Indian auto industry or whatever. Well, the world auto industry, how many cars they make for India. I care about whether I have a car and what kind of car it is. So that's a private good. But for a public good, I care about the total size of the army and the navy to feel secure in terms of national defense. I care about how the air in Delhi is not what I'm breathing. I mean, what I'm breathing is basically the ambient air quality in Delhi. So that's what matters to me. So instead of these individualized QIs, now we replace it by the aggregate quantity Q. And since aggregate quantity and supply will ultimately have to be same, I'm replacing it by the aggregate quantity X. So this is the way to bring in public goods instead of private goods. So now the good in question is a public good. And the other stuff is money spent on everything else, all the other private goods. And the question is, what is the efficient level of production? Right? With these utility and profit functions, if a utilitarian planner is looking at this, what is the X that the planner would like to choose? And what is the principle there? Well, the planner is going to maximize sum of utilities minus sum of costs as before. Again, one or two steps I have skipped. I have not spelled out the resource constraints because as before, they cancel out in the objective function. So the planner is maximizing this. Now, if you do that, what is the principle of optimality? The principle of optimality becomes this. Again, I you can easily see this. Again, I haven't bothered to write down the Lagrangian, but if you do so and just even mechanically do it, I think it's easy to see that mathematically we'll get this first order condition. If you change Xj, if you hold every firm's production of the public good fixed and increase the production of one firm, on the cost side, of course, there's the marginal cost of that firm. On the production side, all the consumers are affected by that marginal change. That extra bit of output, right? Let's say we're talking of the road networks as a public good, and one company, Larsen and Toubro, has been asked to build another kilometer of roads. So there's a marginal cost that Larsen and Toubro has to pay. And why do we have this summation? Because that extra stretch of road is going to benefit many people. All these private citizens, consumers, they can use that road for at the same time. So we have to add up their marginal utilities, and that's what the benefit side is to compare against the cost side. And as usual, marginal principles say that you keep increasing production till marginal social benefit equals marginal social cost. This, what I've written down, this equation also implicitly says that, if the public good is being manufactured by multiple firms, then one part of the principle of optimality is that their marginal costs have to be equal to each other. Now, so that sounds fine, okay? As far as describing what the efficient level is, that's easy to do. I put it in just one single slide. How much should we invest in roads? How large should the police departments be? How big the army should be? How much should we invest in cleaning up our air and our rivers and so on? Okay, this is a sort of core guideline to that. Now, implementing it in practice would run into a pretty serious problem right off the bat. So what is that problem? The problem is that, when we talked about private goods, the optimal principle was all marginal utilities have to be the same as all marginal costs. Now, for that, it is necessary to know all the utility functions and the cost functions. Okay, so a planner would find it difficult to carry out that optimality exercise. Right? Can do it theoretically, but translating it into practice would be hard because you need to know all the utility and cost functions. But when you leave it to markets will bring about the efficient allocation, right? In the case of private goods, And in the operation of the markets, only the consumers need to know their own utility function and the firms need to know their cost function. So the informational requirement is very minimal and reasonable. Okay, so that's why we didn't run into the problem. Who knows what the socially efficient amount, how many cars should be produced and how many apples should be grown in the orchards. But the market takes care of the problem. Essentially, consumers can vote with their wallets. Okay, if there are too few apple orchards and not enough apples are grown, and that'll drive up the price of apples, and that'll immediately send signals to farmers to expand their acreage, and that way efficient allocation comes about. At the core of it lies the mechanism that consumers can vote with their wallet. Now, if it's a public good, we just discussed that the market won't do, right? Government has to provide it. So now, how much should be provided? Now that mechanism of consumers sending out these signals by voting with the wallet, that doesn't operate anymore because the good is now not voluntarily bought. Okay, the government has to impose taxes, raise revenues, and provide our roads and highways and armies and police departments. So how does the government know? Okay, this thing, some of the marginal utilities, the government has to know these functions to carry it out, and it's an absurd level of knowledge that we require of governments. So that's the problem. We know in theory what the efficient level of public good should be, but we can't carry it out in practice because we don't know individual utility functions. The cost side, maybe, you can figure out. It's typically, there's a small number of firms. There can be a problem. You may not know what the cost of building it, but let's abstract away from that. If the government is thinking about, how much the highways invested should be in highways. Okay, they've figured out, what the cost of building these highways is. What about what the social benefit is? How do we know that? So let's, for simplicity, let's think of a discrete public good. Right? For example, whether a bridge should be built. In Delhi, do we need another bridge over the Yamuna to reduce trans-Yamuna traffic congestion? Okay. So X takes a value of either 0 or 1. 1 means that the public good has been built. So the cost of provision is C. Let's sort of normalize our utility function. So if no public good is provided, each individual gets a 0 utility, obviously. And if it is provided, consumer I gets a utility of theta I. What is the optimal provision rule? This is just, converting our continuous case into a discrete case. Okay, it's either 0 or 1. So when is it socially optimal to build the public good? Well, when these individual values, these are the sort of willingness to pay of each individual for the bridge, if they add up to C or more. Okay, again, simple, clear criterion. Everybody's value for the new bridge can be measured in money, okay, which is like, what is the maximum amount of money in principle you're willing to give to have this bridge and make your life simpler. And if we add up all those numbers, does it cover the cost of building the bridge? That's the issue. Now, here's the problem. Theta I is usually private information. Only we know, how valuable the bridge is to us. And there's enormous heterogeneity for most public goods in this aspect. How do we solve the problem then? Yes, in principle, the government can build the bridge for us and impose taxes on us to fund the bridge. One problem of that, of course, is that, some people for whom the bridge is not very valuable may grumble, I'm just paying these taxes. I don't have a choice. I don't have any use of this bridge. I will never cross and go to the other side. Okay, forget that, right? But the fact is that the bridge, we don't know whether the bridge is worth building or not. We don't know whether this inequality holds or it's the other way around. That's the problem. So let's just try to guarantee efficiency. The bridge should be built only in those situations where it ought to be built, right? Where the benefit is more than the cost. Well, one solution is voting. Let's put it on the ballot. Okay. Worldwide, and especially in America, and especially in California, they're putting increasingly individual itemized policies on the ballot. People directly vote instead of legislatures passing a law or not passing a law to bring it about. People directly vote on concrete policy measures, right? Whether a certain drug should be legalized or not, that sort of thing comes up in the ballot all the time. So we can say, okay, in the next assembly elections, we'll put the question of the bridge on the ballot. Okay, in addition to voting for candidates, all the citizens of Delhi will vote whether they want the bridge or not. And if the bridge is to be built, it's to be built if it gets majority support. But if that is true, then everybody will pay an equal share of the cost. Right? There's an equal tax which will be imposed on all citizens of Delhi. So 1/nth share of the cost will fall on each person. Now, it's very easy to see that this doesn't guarantee efficiency. Okay, here's a simple example. Suppose there are three people. Their values of the public good are 25, 25, and 50. So that means the total social benefit of building that public good is 100. Add these numbers. The total cost of building the public good is 90. So obviously the efficient decision is to build it, right? You get a surplus socially. Now, since you don't know who has what value, and you have just prescribed that the cost is to be shared equally, individuals 1 and 2 will of course vote against it, because how much they're getting, 25, is less than the cost share, which is 30, 1/3 of 90. So 2 people vote against it and 1 person votes for it. So the proposal gets defeated. Okay. But we just saw by adding up these numbers that the socially efficient thing to do is to build the bridge and make the third guy pay a bigger share. But you can't selectively make somebody pay a bigger share if you don't know who that third person is, who is the person with a disproportionate benefit of the bridge. And that's why it's difficult to, even voting, majority voting, will not solve the problem for us. As this example illustrates, sometimes the wrong decision will be made. The problem with voting is that it does not capture, one person has 1 vote, right? But everybody doesn't have the same intensity of preference for the public good, okay? These 2 people lose by a small amount, they have their votes. This guy wins big if the public good is built, but he only has 1 vote, just as these others. So a single vote helps us express our ordinal preference between 2 options, which do we prefer, but it does not help us express by what margin we prefer the preferred option. And that is the reason why it will not take us to efficiency. That opens up the question, is there anything else we can do to guarantee that public goods will be provided? And let's keep our attention to the simple case of a discrete public good, okay? Wow. Is there anything we can do? And the answer is that there's a clever way in which we can devise what is called a mechanism or a set of rules that will make sure that the public good will be built whenever the benefit exceeds the cost, and will never be built if the benefit falls short of the cost. So in spite of the problem of private information that we see over here, you can, in principle, surmount the problem, okay, through something. I'll tell you what the name is. So let me show you how that can be done. So let's go about it in the following way. Let each person bear an equal share of the cost to begin with. We'll make adjustments to that, right? But as a starting point, as a benchmark, every consumer will have to pay 1 over n times C, okay? Plus some top up, maybe, but we'll come to the top up. That's where the most of the action is. So I'll define values this way, right? Theta is the gross value of the public good. But if you take away that default cost share, let's call that WI, right? So this is the net value, if you will, of the public good to consumer I. What is the efficient provision rule defined in terms of the WIs, right? This is just a rewriting of the criteria. So X star should be 1, the level of the public good should be 1, if and only if all these WIs add up to something non-negative, okay? Which is the same as saying all the theta, the gross values, should be greater than the cost of providing it, right? That is the same thing written in terms of the Ws. We now want to do a mechanism design exercise, okay? Mechanism design is a technical term. There's a vast literature. It's a very important area of microeconomics. It's more the subject of the second course in next semester. But let me, in a nutshell, mention mechanism design here. Essentially, broadly speaking, what it means is that, we have a problem here. We have to bring about certain kinds of allocations. To do that, we have to set up the rules of the game so that it is in the self-interest of the agents to reveal their private information. The problem is created because there's private information about how much each person values the bridge, okay? So we want to cleverly devise the rules so that each person in their self-interest will reveal the information to us or to the government, and the government will be able to carry out the efficient decision. So let me show you why, how. After having set up the baseline is that, if a bridge is built, everyone has to pay 1/nth of the cost share. Over and above that, whatever is on this slide is over and above that. So each consumer has to submit a bid, BI, which is intended to be an expression or a report of WI, right? This WI, the net value after subtracting this equal cost share. So each consumer has been asked to essentially report what their WI is. Okay. Now, if you do it in a very simple manner, if you say, okay, whatever bid you submit, you have to pay that bid as a contribution to the funding, then people will game it. Then people may not truthfully report what their WI is. But suppose in general, each person, the rules that we have written down say that each consumer will receive some monetary transfer TI contingent on everyone's bids, right? So this monetary transfer is not some fixed amount. Everybody submit their bids. As a function of that vector of bids, each person receives some monetary transfer. And the bridge building decision is also determined by the bids which various people have submitted. How? Well, if the bids add up to 0, then the bridge will be built. If the bids add up to some negative number, then no, right? A negative bid means a person says that for the bridge to be built, I demand some money from the system instead of being willing to contribute. Because if the bridge is built in any way, I have to pay that 1/nth cost share, I want a deduction from that. That's what a negative BI means. Okay. And a positive BI means that the individual is saying, I want to top up, I want to contribute some more, some extra towards building of the bridge. Okay. Suppose we have written down the following rules. These are the transfer rules, the transfer payments to agent. And it's kind of in 2 parts. It says, if the bridge is built, agent I, consumer I, will get a monetary transfer, which is the sum of everybody else's bids. Everybody else's, J not equal to I. That sum could be positive or negative. So this rule is saying that when the bridge is built, this person may get something negative, which means that this person may be asked to contribute more to the fund. Or, when this is positive, that means this person is given a refund from that equal cost share. Okay. So it depends on what others have bid. This transfer could end up being positive or negative. But the transfer is zero if the bridge is not built. Okay, so this is how the bids will influence the two critical things: how much money each person gets and whether the bridge is built or not. The bridge is only built if everyone's bids exceed, is a positive number or at least a non-negative number. And the transfer of each individual gets is the sum of the bids of all the others, not counting his own bid. Those are the rules. This is called a Groves-Clark mechanism. All right. Now, what is interesting about this is the following feature. It is a dominant strategy for each consumer or each individual to place a bid which is exactly equal to WI. Okay. In other words, although they are free to lie, under these rules, it is absolutely in their self-interest to truthfully report what their net value of the good, of the public good, is through their bid. All right, I'll show you that. I'll give you the reason. First, it's important that you understand what I'm claiming. I'm claiming that under this system, under this set of rules, each person will use his bid to express his true value of the public good. Not because he cares about, larger, efficient social decision making, but because he finds it in his own interest to do so. Now, let me show you why. So consumers' net utility is this, right? If the bridge is not built, which is to say, if everybody's bids add up to a negative number, then the bridge won't be built. So that's simple. Each person gets zero in that case. No transfers, no bridge. But if everybody's bids is a non-negative number, that means the bridge will be built. And what is consumer I's utility? It is the net value of the bridge plus the monetary transfer received, which is the sum of everybody else's bids, right? So these two lines are basically translating what rules were written out in the previous slide.
So can I ask a question? Should we not deduct BI here if the person is supposed to pay BI for the bridge to be built? If he has bid BI?
No. First of all, I am making up the rules. I am the emissary of Groves and Clark. I have received the wise word from them. So I'm telling you, these are the rules. I'll try to persuade you that these are nice rules because it leads to people truthfully revealing their value of the public good. Okay. So at this point, when I'm like Moses, I've received the word of God on a tablet, and I'm showing you the tablet. So
I was just talking about the utility function, the consumer's utility function that you just showed us.
I went into a rhetorical flourish. What? Tell me again what you wanted to.
So the next slide, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So this VI.
Yes.
Shouldn't there be a minus BI as well? If we are bidding BI and we are supposed to pay BI.
No, but the rules don't say that you have to pay what your bid is.
Okay.
Bidding,
got it.
Right? That's why. I mean, it's a bit of a misleading term. But if you look at the transfer function carefully, it does not involve BI. And that's actually the key insight. I mean, it's you're hitting up on a right spot. I'll come back to that. Okay. The fact is that your payoff is actually independent of BI. What BI essentially ends up determining is whether the bridge is built or not. On neither line does BI enter. So it's a very important point that you raised. Yeah. Anyway.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I had one more doubt in the consumer's net utility only.
Yes.
The consumer does end up paying the average cost, right? Like the cost per person, C by M.
Yes.
So shouldn't that be deducted from the net utility when we're saying net?
But it's included in WI.
That's a benchmark, right? When the bridge is built, that's included in WI. Remember how we defined WI? WI is theta I, the gross value of the bridge, minus the equal cost share, which everybody has to pay anyway. So this is the net value.
Right, sir.
Yes.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now We're almost there. So given this individual payoff function or utility function under these set of rules, why is my claim true? Why is it optimal for everyone to express a bid which is exactly the WI? Let me show you that using a picture. So remember this, okay? So I'll draw a picture to try and convince you that my claim is true. Let me draw a line here. What is this line? So I am consumer I. I'm just looking at it from my perspective. Consumer I, my narrow perspective. I know my WI. Okay. Let's say my WI is positive without loss of generality. In the case where it's negative, same logic will apply. So let's think of the positive case. What am I measuring on the line? What I'm measuring on the line is the summation of all the other BJs, J not equal to I. The sum of the bids of others. I don't know what that number is, right? I'll consider all possibilities. And here's 0. Okay. So sum of others bids could be something positive, in which case I'll get some money if the bridge is built. It could be negative, in which case I'll have to pay some extra if the bridge is built. And according to the claim, I should find that my best bid, my optimal bid is WI, okay? Apparently, but you guys are skeptical. But let me consider that, all right? So if this is what the bid I pays, let me mark the number minus WI over here. Now, there are two possibilities. One is the sum of everyone's bids is to the left of this, which means that they have in total submitted a negative bid, and my positive bid is not going to outweigh it, right? So the bridge won't be built. So in this range, the bridge won't be built. Red zone, okay? No bridge is built. Then what is my payoff? It's just 0. If I've bid truthfully and the sum of everyone's bids is higher than minus WI, that means that my positive bid, even if the others' bids are negative, and certainly if they're positive, my positive bid will outweigh it, and the bridge will end up being built. So then what is my payoff then? Green zone, green light, bridge is built. So then what is my payoff? My payoff is, first of all, the WI, my true value of building the bridge, plus sum of BJ, okay? And is this a positive number or a negative number?
Positive, sir.
It's positive. Say that again. It's a positive number, right? In this
Yes, sir.
region, when the sum of everybody else's bid is higher than my net value of the bridge, and remember that I've placed a bid which is equal to my net value, I'm being truthful in this case, there, whenever the sum of everyone else's bids is in this zone, given truthful bidding, that ensures that this is a strictly positive number. It's 0 at this point, but everywhere else it's strictly positive. Okay, so I don't know what the sum of others' bids are. I consider all possible values, the entire range. And in this, if I bid truthfully in this red stretch, my payoff is going to be 0. In this stretch, my payoff is going to be strictly positive given by this. Okay, fine. Here's an alternative strategy I'm considering as consumer I or citizen I. Same line, okay? And I think, okay, I have a net value of the bridge, which is positive, okay? So even over and above the equal cost share, I'm actually truly in my mind, I'm willing to pay some more to see this thing getting built. But let me underreport on this, right? Why blurt out that number that I'm willing to pay another 10,000 rupees, let me say 2,000, or let me even say minus 3,000, that if the bridge is built, I want 3,000 rebate or cash back from that cost share that I paid earlier. So let's consider underreporting. So you choose a BI, an alternative bid, which is not equal to WI. Let's say you still choose it to be some positive number, but less than WI. So that means your bid, if I take its mirror image, its negative value, your bid is here. This is your minus BI. Okay, I should have used a different color. Anyway, so now let's consider this range. Okay, this is the red zone. Here the payoff is 0, because the sum of everyone's bids plus your bid has to be 0. It's not sum of everyone's bids plus your true value. Right? The government takes your true value to be whatever you bid. So that means in this zone, the bridge won't be built. And in this zone, the bridge will be built, and you will get summation of Bj, which is a strictly positive number in this entire zone. Okay? It's just that the decision point, the social decision point shifts because you've changed your bid. That's all that happens. Right? It becomes harder because you're bidding lower than your true value now. The threshold the bar has been raised. The bridge is going to be built in a few situations. Now, the interesting thing is, look at this range of values of others' bids. Okay, so this green interval, the blue interval. Everywhere else, it does not matter. It does not matter whether you placed a bid of WI or you placed a bid less than WI. Okay, as far as this red part is concerned, the payoffs are 0 from both your strategies. As far as this green part is concerned, again, the payoff is the same, right? Some positive number, this. The only difference arises when others' bids falls in this zone, okay? And if you are bidding your truthful value, then in this zone, your payoff would have been this, which is a strictly positive number. But if you have underbid, then in this zone, your payoff, instead of this positive number, becomes 0. Okay? So if you underbid, if you don't report your true WI truthfully, but underreport it, then in some situations, it doesn't make a difference. But there are some situations where your payoff or your utility will be low. So if you have followed the steps of that argument, and you may want to go back and review it, the final conclusion is it's a dominant strategy to tell the truth through your bid, to reveal your true value. That's the beauty of the Groves-Clark mechanism, that that we seem to have a pretty difficult problem. Socially, we have to make a decision through our government whether some public good should be built or not. Voting doesn't do. You can put it on the ballot. Inefficiencies may arise. But if you set up the rules this way, adding these very clever top-up payments or receipts, and ask people to reveal how much they truly value the bridge, they will report truthfully. It's in their interest to do so, and then the efficient decision can be implemented. So this is, I have been a little bit of territorial aggression, if you will. This sort of stuff comes in the second micro course. The second micro course is very interesting, and I envy the people who teach it. So from time to time, I poach a little into their territory and take a few nuggets from there. So I've done so with the justification that since I'm talking of market efficiency, which is part of my mandate, I'm entitled to talk about failures of efficiency, and there this thing comes in. Anyway, So these are, as I said, this is an early example you're seeing of what is called mechanism design and asymmetric information. Yes. And there's a lot of stuff which tells us how using people's own incentives, a lot of information can be teased out of them, and we can promote efficient decision making to a large extent. Let me quickly mention the other caveats. One is imperfect competition. If we have a monopolistic market, for example, which we'll study in this course itself, you will see that quantity produced is not efficient, depending on how exactly the monopolist prices. In the next course, you will see, after studying some game theory and studying oligopoly, like Kuhner models, Bertrand models, you will see that even if there is some limited amount of competition, a few firms, but they don't act as price takers, even then, there's underproduction, not the efficient amount, something less than that will be produced, and the prices will be too high. So that it falls upon governments and regulatory agencies to correct the inefficiencies that imperfectly competitive market structures create. Right. So that's our caveat 3. The fourth is asymmetric information. Again, this is very much going to be in your second course, but let me briefly say the main point. If buyers and sellers are not equally well informed about the transaction, then the price system may not exploit all the gains from trade, and markets may not allocate resources efficiently. So this entire, praise, as we are saying, that at least we have efficiency, that breaks down often under asymmetric information. One well-known problem is adverse selection. This happens when buyers and sellers are, not equally well informed. So the classic example, going back to a paper by George Akerlof, is, market for used cars, let's say. So the seller is much better informed about how well this car is still running after 10 years. The buyer is much more in doubt. And what that creates is a price spiral that the buyers are only willing to pay kind of the average quality, the price commensurate with the average quality. And the people owning the best used cars, they're not willing to sell at that price. So the spectrum of quality levels which appear on the market gets chopped off from the higher end. Some best quality cars are withdrawn. And when buyers realize that, they revise their price offer downwards because they know the best cars are not coming on the market. So they have to reduce their average estimation of value. And that creates 2 further exits from the top end. And so you have a downward spiral of price and quality. And in some cases, the market may even shut down because of that. So that's called adverse selection. And sometimes you have moral hazards. So for example, I go and buy car insurance, and it's an efficient transaction for me to, transfer the risk of damage or theft to a large insurance company, which is pooling these risks. But then if I get fully insured 100%, anything happens to the car, they'll pay me the full value of the car down to the last rupee. Then I'd have no incentive to take care of, to be careful of locking my car, install alarms or what have you, or drive carefully. So that reduces the quality of the car and increases the risk. And knowing that, the insurance company will jack up the insurance premium, right? So that's the moral hazard problem that again arises from asymmetric information. There, the problem is not hidden information, what is the quality of the car, but hidden action, right? Whether I'm taking the proper safeguards after I've been insured. So governments, if they want to step in and correct these problems, in the second course, you'll discuss those things. But the question there is whether the governments operating under the same information constraints can solve the problem. Can the government take over the used car market and try to solve the problem? Well, the government has to, first of all, procure all the used cars. And how does the government distinguish between better cars and worse cars? So that problem remains, and it's an interesting theoretical question when there is profitable intervention. And the last point is that, through things like signaling or carefully designed contracts, markets often try to solve these problems of asymmetric information. But anyway, the point remains that this unqualified praise of market goes out of the window in markets where there's significant asymmetric information like credit markets, insurance markets, used goods markets, and so on. Finally, the previous 4 points were about efficiency. In the presence of externalities, public goods, asymmetric information, and less than perfect competition, there is room for government and regulation. Markets shouldn't be left to themselves, even on efficiency grounds. You can create win-win improvements in principle through some government regulation of the markets. Now, often why governments intervene and put in taxes, subsidies, various kinds of regulation, all the things that we see all around us, is to change the income distribution. It's driven not by considerations of efficiency, but equity. Okay, so don't buy into this kind of simple-minded thing that, our first welfare theorem says markets are efficient, so they should be left to themselves. No, often, there's inequality. Some part of inequality is handed down to us from the past. We had a caste system. We had, we didn't have democracy and we didn't have free markets. And then we inherited those problems. And there's nothing in the markets, nothing that we studied so far is that, if people start highly unequal, if their monetary endowments, for example, in the little model are highly unequal to begin with, that the market will somehow bring about equality. No, nothing. The first welfare theorem, no welfare theorem says so. So we may want to correct the past injustices. There's also the view partially expressed by Thomas Piketty that, markets have a tendency to diverge, even if you all kind of started more or less with equal incomes and wealth, because of all kinds of randomness and luck factors, inequality will grow over time under a free market system. Maybe there are, we can't talk about that in this simple framework, but there's that view. So for whatever reason, inequality grows and we may want to correct it. And that is one big reason for intervention in markets, and that's nothing to sniff at. There's often pretty valid ethical reasons to do it. The question is, when we try to change the income distribution or bring about more equitable allocations or move to a different point on the Pareto frontier, there are better ways of trying to achieve that goal and worse ways, right? So there's a policy debate about what is the best way. And what we have seen in this simple model embodies a sort of starting principle, which is, as you saw, the planner, any planner, or at least most planners who can be modeled as having social welfare functions, they don't want to change the market quantities of the bread. They'll want to change it if there were externalities, if bread production is creating smoke, or the other reasons. But suppose none of those first 4 factors are there. Then what the market, if it wants to, bring about a more equal society, ideally, theoretically, the best way of doing it is not to change the quantity, not to impose taxes and subsidies which are tied to the volume of production and consumption, but to do lump sum transfers. Target those TIs and the SJs. Okay, you take money from people not contingent on what economic activity they do. You say, okay, these billionaires have to pay so much, and then you give money to poor people, right? Lump sum taxes and transfers are ideally the best way of bringing about redistribution. Now, in practice, it's a pipe dream, right? We can't do it, of course. So often, the more interesting debates are about, among several imperfect instruments of income redistribution, which is the least worst, which is the one which creates the least deadweight loss, and so on.